There is a reason that we call today Good Friday. As terrible as the story we've just heard is, there is another story that is even more terrible. That's the story of a humanity which is estranged from God, forgetful of God, in rebellion against God, and at war with God and with each other. This is the story of a humanity who have lost their home in God. It is the feelings of guilt that we have in the presence of God. It's the shame that we have about ourselves and our nature. It's the inward turned love that turns us against God and other people. This story would, in the end, leave us alone, separated from God and cast out of our home in Him. But it's precisely to rewrite that story that Jesus goes through the experiences that we hear about today. Jesus walked alone so that He could bring us home. Everything that happens in this story happens for your sake and happens for my sake. Jesus finds himself estranged from other human beings. He finds himself without God's assistance, walking the road of suffering, bearing the weight of sin, and of doing it all alone for our sake. Jesus, the perfect Son of God, was the only one who could walk this path, and therefore he had to walk it alone. But he did that so that we could find our way home to God. Our story starts in the garden with his prayer to the Father, where he wrestles with the incredible loneliness and suffering that is to come, and then chooses it, so that God's will to save could be fulfilled. Jesus could have chosen differently, but his desire for you to be brought home and to share as a member of God's family drove him to all that is to come. Jesus walked alone so that he could bring us home. And that loneliness for him starts even now. Because while Jesus is praying with all the fear and anxiety that faces him, the disciples are asleep. They wake up only when the soldiers arrive, and then a friend comes to him and kisses him in greeting. But this is not the kiss of someone who will walk with him. It's the kiss of a betrayer. Are we sometimes like that? Outwardly prayerful, giving God our lip service, but our hearts far from him? Perhaps. But that's why Jesus is doing this. He's going to make that better. Jesus walked alone so that he could bring us home. And now the disciples do come to him, but Peter, with all his enthusiasm, still doesn't understand Jesus and takes the path of violence. Just like you and I, Peter tries the way of power and aggression to get the result that he wants. He's even going to try to do God's will by using godless means. But Jesus won't have it. Jesus is left lonely by the fact that even his disciples do not understand his ways. No more of this, he says. And he reaches out to heal the ear of the man who's been hurt. And Peter doesn't know how to deal with that. Still, he follows behind Jesus, not notice with him, but behind him, watching what's happening. But when he is finally accused of being with Jesus, he denies being with him, or in fact, even knowing him. Denied the pathway of anger and violence, Peter doesn't know what to do. He's not prepared to pay the cost of following, to live as his Lord would live, and to walk with his Lord, and so instead he lives a denial of Jesus. And at that moment, Jesus turns and looks straight at him. just as Jesus looks at us. He knows what's happening. He knows why it's happening. But he has chosen this. Jesus walked alone so that he could bring us home. And now Jesus is truly alone. The disciples vacate the scene, and Jesus is beaten alone. He stands before the elders alone, and just as God might say to us, he says to them, I tell you, if I tell you, you will not believe, and if I ask you, you will not answer. He knows the hardness of our hearts. He knows the hard hearts of these elders. He knows that whatever he says will be met by dumb silence, of selfishness, self-importance, injustice and death-dealing. And then we're told the whole assembly rose so that they might go to Pilate and present this man, this singular man, against all of us as someone deserving death. We, they say, have found this man subverting our nation. We have found. Any voice that may have been raised in his defence is now silenced. The group speaks, and Jesus is alone. And so now, by himself, Jesus stands before Pilate, and they all begin to accuse him. Pilate asks him, are you the king of the Jews? And Jesus says, you have said so. You could almost hear him saying, oh, what does it matter what I say? That's the whole point, isn't it? You're accusing me so you can condemn me. Jesus is God's chosen king. But he will stand here in the corridors of power alone. Because this is what it means to be God's chosen king. He is not here for himself. He is here for the people. He is here for you and me. At this point, interestingly, Pilate doesn't want to condemn Jesus, but nor will he stand up for him, nor will he walk with him, and so instead he takes his opportunity and passes him off to Herod. Herod is only interested in his own amusement, and the chance maybe to see some kind of miracle. Not for any religious reason, but for the spectacle of the thing. And Jesus can't answer any of Herod's questions because not one of them is a real question. Here, Jesus faces the idle curiosity and perhaps the casual, playful cruelty of humanity. He stands alone as Herod and his soldiers ridicule and mock him and finally dress him in a robe before sending him back to Pilate. And Pilate sent this miraculous prophet for Herod to gawk at, and on that day we're told that Pilate and Herod finally overcame their enmity and became friends. But Jesus still walks alone. There's one man who really should walk the road of the cross with Jesus, and that's Barabbas. He's a murderer. He's a rebel against the Roman powers. He's the very picture of our rebellion against authority, against God and against humanity. But here, in the most literal way possible, Jesus' life is exchanged for his life. Just as soon in the story, his life will be exchanged for your life and mine. And so Jesus starts his road to the cross. The daughters of Jerusalem on the way would weep for him, but his compassion is instead for them. If humanity can do this to God when he visits them in grace, then what are we going to do to each other? Jerusalem of that day is headed for trouble. Jesus' heart is for them. They cannot walk where he now goes, but he will walk that way for them. Jesus walks alone so that he can bring us home. And there at the cross, Jesus is again singled out and separated from everybody else. The people gather against him, the rulers are against him, the soldiers are against him, Even one of the criminals on the cross next to him is against him. Because finally, in the story, there are people who are said to be with Jesus. Here are the two criminals on his right and his left who are being crucified with him. But even here, one will reject Jesus and willingly walk his own way, even into death. The other one recognises Jesus for who he is and knows that he himself is bound to walk a separate way to Jesus, for Jesus is innocent and he is getting what his deeds deserve. His path leads him far from God. But knowing that his path must diverge from Jesus, nevertheless, this criminal who has no plea pleads, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Finally, one man gives voice to our prayer that he would be with Jesus. And now Jesus' path is no longer walked alone. Because with words of incredible grace, he reaches out to this criminal and says, truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. This is why Jesus came. Jesus walked alone so that he can bring us home. And now, at the moment of his death, Jesus' path opens to include the criminal, to include the sinners, to include the people for whom he prays forgiveness from the cross, to include the whole world. Jesus walked alone so that he could bring us home. And finally, he then turns to his Father. And now his prayer, which we started with at the start of the whole story in Gethsemane, that the Father's will to save would be done, is complete. And Jesus prays that now he will not be alone. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And so with his last breath, Jesus goes home, promising the criminal by his side that he too will walk this path with Jesus. Having walked his path alone, at the very moment of going to God, Jesus now includes everybody. For nothing more than the trust that Jesus has the kingdom, for nothing more than our need, for nothing more than turning to him, the one who walks alone takes us with him. The one who walks alone walks with us. Jesus walked the lonely road of death, but it was the road to God. And the thief on the cross and all of us are drawn along with Jesus. He walks the road of death alone so that we can walk the path of life with him. In that moment, God overcomes all, and the Spirit of Jesus is finally with God at home. And he is with God for us, so that we never have to walk alone, and so that we may find our way home. Jesus walked alone so that he could bring us home. And that's why we call it Good Friday. Amen.